Hi, and welcome to another episode of Silver Goose Farm Stories. I'm your host, Mama Goose, aka Maria Silva. Today's episode seems like a very first world problem, and I apologize in advance if I come off sounding ungrateful or whiny. That's not how I feel for the vast majority of the time, although I will say I am guilty of occasional summer melancholy, and that's when my husband will scoop me up and rescue me from myself. So this is a reflection on those moments and what I'm learning even from the downtimes. So much of the fall and winter and even the beginning of spring is spent prepping the garden, doing the heavy lifting, digging and running irrigation and mending and making new animal spaces, and in anticipation for the heat of the year. Because as I've mentioned many times, I just don't function well. And the cooler weather is invigorating for me, and I can jump up and feel like this is my chance to tick off all the boxes of our never-ending checklist before the heat saps me into a puddle of nothingness. And then the weather will turn, and you just kind of have to step back and see, like, did I do enough this year? So the initial part of the summer, actually this year, was surprising because I was still working pretty well, even in the very hot weather. So maybe I'm acclimating. I'm not sure. I guess for almost 5 years in, I should be somewhat used to it by now. But we're taking baby steps in that process. We have, in our newest version of our garden, we've decided to take back parts of our lawn. We're leaving a little grassy area for kids to play, but where they don't really go, we've set up row gardens and vegetable planter boxes just to maximize the use of the area, since it's already irrigated or has like sprinkler lines that can be turned into drip lines. And also just because grass, why grass? I mean, it uses up water, and it's a part of our farm that we don't allow our animals to come graze it. So it's not like it's food. And, it doesn't provide anything directly for us other than like the aesthetic of, look at me, I'm able to waste water enough to keep this thing alive. It doesn't benefit me in any shape or form. Okay, so that aside, so we've reclaimed our lawn into a little bit more garden space that's functional, and we planted row crops over this large stretch of grass. And that's where I put tomatoes and peppers and some vining plants like cucumbers and melons, and they really loved that area. It's relatively cool because there's this big oak tree in the middle of our yard that kind of shades enough and keeps the vegetables from frying. And, at the height of summer, we had corn growing right next to it, and the pumpkin vines kind of sprawl out, and it covers up all the spaces where plants died. So it looks like, wow, everything looks filled in and grown, and you can't even tell that I just decimated an entire line of beans because, you can't see them anymore. I can't even tell you how accomplished it makes me feel when the zucchini takes off and when the pumpkin vines start growing. Like, what we let grow wild takes over, and it actually helps me avoid the worst of the heat in the day because they provide so much natural shade. I can walk through after doing the morning animal chores, and just the satisfaction of being in a garden that is growing is enough to make me ignore the trickles of sweat sliding down my neck and dripping off my nose. And yeah, even just walking through the garden in the summer will cause me to sweat enough that I look like I walked out of the shower. You can ignore all that because look at the size of this zucchini, and how many cucumbers are we getting today? And look, a red tomato, except that it's pecked through on the other side. But still, it looks beautiful. And the discomfort of heat is overpowered by the bounty that comes from a garden that is flourishing in the summertime. And then the mishaps start to happen and start chipping away at the delight of the harvest. So this year, one day, the drip system that was controlling our row crops decided to malfunction, We use one of those Milnor forestation timers that controls the row crops and the grapevines. I don't know if there is a better system out there. Please let me know, because this is the only one that we can find that's available like in the big box stores, or even just online, that not a giant commercial farmer would use. But it basically has 4 stations that you attach your drip lines to, and you can control the stations to run for certain periods of time over a certain number of days. And they work well for the most part, but I do notice maybe it's just too hot and it fries the computer or whatever inside. But every now and then there's a point in the year where something happens. And in this case, one of the little closures to our stations didn't close. And so the water kept dripping into our row gardens for a period of 24 to even up to 72 hours. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest. Thankfully, it was drip tape, so it was a really low flow, or else we'd be standing in puddles. Although maybe it would have been better if it was a faster flow, because we would have noticed it sooner. We noticed that right around the time of this immense heat wave, all the other plants in our garden that are on less, that are also on timed waterings were less happy, but our row gardens were flourishing. And so I was a little bit grateful for the boost that it gave these plants that I'd normally struggle with. But then we discovered that our row garden was planted over part of the leach lines to our septic system. And because that one station malfunctioned, the ground over our leach lines had become super oversaturated. And then our septic system backed up. And then I got a lovely surprise walking through our yard one day, and I stepped on the cover of our septic lines and found that it wasn't actually covering anything. It was just sort of floating. Thankfully, we were able to get it pumped right away, and it wasn't a terrible mess, but lesson learned. We might have to rethink our garden location next year in case that happens again. Another thing that I've been struggling with previous years and also this year, but this year with like a vengeance, are the ants and their aphid farming. So ants are notorious in this area. I don't know if that's the same in all other rural areas, but for whatever reason, there's just like millions upon millions of ants of different colonies. Like you can identify them. Like there's the big red ones. Those are the stinky small ones. Those are the ones that love fat. And these are the ones that love sugar. And you just, my girls can identify like at least 6 different types of ants that live on our property. But there's some variety of ants like to do aphid farming. So in theory, it's very cool. These particular ants like to feed off of this dewy liquid secretion that aphids make. And so the ants collect the eggs and plant them, quote unquote, in little clusters on various plants that aphids feed on. So in my garden, it's the kale, it's our broccolis and cabbages and my sweet potatoes. They love sweet potato leaves for whatever reason. And then the aphids hatch, and the ants get something, and the aphids eat the plants, and then they continue to, lay their eggs, and it's a cycle, and they're all very happy in their little environment that they've created for themselves. But I am very sad because my plants shrivel up and die, and they're covered in aphids, and it takes me 20 minutes to wash off a single leaf of kale because there's just so many bugs all over it. It is not fun. I've been avoiding harvesting any more kale this summer because I just don't want to touch them. Plus, in addition to the aphid farming ants, we also have fire ants that swarm up because they like to live on around in our pepper and bean plants. And so whenever myself or my kids go out to harvest, if you grab the wrong plants, you just sort of get covered in ants and bug bites. And, not a fun thing to do. There are natural remedies out there to deal with ants and plants and those sort of things, and I am not the best person to ask for that advice. I look it up and I make a mental note like, oh yes, I should make this spray and I should bring it out for me. But to be honest, I don't always plan to go out with my garden armed with a spray bottle. I barely remember to bring a basket to harvest to carry things in. I'm usually like tucking things into my shirt and like carrying it in like a crazy person. I'm just not put together enough to remember to make a solution, bring out a bottle, spray my plants, bring the solution back in. It's just like this additional checklist that I am not mature enough to get to. One of these days, I hope so, because there's a wonderful variety of remedies that are available online. Maybe next year. Another thing is that when temperatures are, well, this isn't really garden related, this is just me, but when temperatures are over 100 degrees, I just like to wear my overalls, except when I'm working out on the pasture where there's just too many prickers and bugs and stuff. But when I'm in my mom uniform, which is more like leggings and shorts and flip-flops, and I go out and do the garden work, I am quickly reminded of how allergic I am to the grass, even the dead grass, and how delicious I am to bugs, even with the guineas that make their rounds and eat a lot of them up. So I have lovely, wonderful polka dot legs at the end of the summer to demonstrate how delicious I am and how sensitive I am. And then we move on to the silly difficulties of, oh my goodness, I'm overwhelmed by the productivity of the garden. It's funny how I spend all of winter and spring agonizing if the garden will even exist. Like, I kill so many seedlings. I have such difficulty transplanting from the seed tray into the ground or repotting, or just, a frost comes in like we did this year twice and kills off your garden. And so you get to this point where you're just like, will anything even grow? And then you get to the height of summer and you think, when will it stop? And then, because I'm just like drowning in an avalanche of vegetables, and I'm super thankful for that. But sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming. Do I want more cucumbers? I love eating cucumbers. And actually all through the summer, I don't even eat meals. I just eat cucumbers. But with the extra, even then, like even with my kids and me mowing through them as fast as you can, there's still too many. And I don't want to make any more pickles because our cabinets are full. My kids love them, but I don't reach for them regularly because I don't enjoy them as much as they do. And so they just kind of pile up and it's a little bit overwhelming. I would can more things, but do I really want to turn the canner on in this heat and have the stove running for several minutes, even several hours, in order to can something properly? Sure, I could run the AC to counteract that heat, but have you seen our latest utility bills? It's ridiculous. You can't afford to do that. I'm waiting for my outdoor kitchen so that I can move all the canning and like heat processing in the summer outdoors. But until then, we have to suffer in the kitchen. Thankfully, I can give away a lot of what we can't eat or are not able to eat. And any baseball bat-sized zucchini or cucumber that's too big or too woody for humans to enjoy is still a treat for the animals. And actually, like, our excessive number of pumpkins is a really good dewormer for them too. But there is a point in the summer where I just sort of peter out, and I'm realizing that there is a similar kind of breaking point associated with every season, and I should just come to terms with that. But for the summer, the thought process kind of goes like this. We grew all this food for our family and friends. We need to harvest it. You can't let it go to waste. And you have to use it somehow. It's so rewarding. It's immensely satisfying to present a meal of things that are exclusively grown and raised on our farm. That's our garlic. That's our cheese. This is our chicken. That's, those are our beans or tomatoes. This is the syrup we made. It's something that I won't get tired of saying and sharing and, delighting in. And I think my children also have that kind of sense of pride in consuming and sharing things that they put their own heart and soul into. We made zucchini cake for my mother's birthday, and they were super excited. Like, they're saying 할머니, which means grandmother in Korean. Like, 할머니, like, this is zucchini from our garden. Like, how cool is that? Also, it's in a cake, and they love it. But also some days, I don't want to make another dish of vegetables. I want a burger and fries. And when I say I want a burger and fries, I don't want a hamburger that I have made from our processed beef and the potatoes we've grown in our garden. I want someone to make it for me so that I don't have to be in the kitchen for hours doing that process. So I guess what I'm saying is there are some days I just want to kick back and relax. And to be honest, on a farm life, there aren't that many stretches of time where I can do that. You can't let those vegetables go to waste. So you can and freeze and dehydrate and cook and cook and cook and cook. And my cup literally runneth over. The freezers are full. The cans are packed. The cabinets are full. This pantry is stuffed to the brim. And I give out to friends and family, and we're still harvesting more. It's amazing. Glory to God. But some days there could be less. I am grateful for the birds that have begun to feast on the bounty. I think the saying is that you give 20% to the rodents and 20% to the birds, and 20% fail, and you get that last 20%. So if this is 20%, like, I have no idea what 100% would look like. Oh my goodness, I can't even fathom. As summer comes to an end, we've noticed our irrigation systems are developing issues, and that sort of happens every year. But this year, I'm particularly thankful for them. Malfunctioning timers and clogged lines and broken dripper heads and means that we've been shutting off the water and manually watering in certain places, but really just starting to let things kind of die down and to begin prepping for the winter time. And it kind of coincided with this final end of summer heat wave, which is like walking into an oven. Like one of those days where you could fry an egg on the sidewalk, no problem. And you can't be outside anyway in that kind of temperature without getting sick. So that's sort of the pause we need in between seasons. One of those heat wave days, our cows got out and decided that they were going to have a little romp through the corn patch, which was great timing because literally the day before I had gone out and harvested as much of the corn as I could. Whatever was left on the stalks were like these very small unfertilized cobs, and we were going to pull them and cut them up and give them to the animals anyway, so they just did an item on our to-do list for us, which is great. I realized that if Cookie was in milk like she was last summer, that the project of processing our food would have the added step of dealing with the dairy. And you should see my face right now as I say that. Like, my eyes just got really big just thinking of the time commitment. And if that freak frost in May hadn't wiped out our fruit blossoms, we'd also be adding the fruit harvest on top of all that. So I guess in a year where everything works out great, I'm not going to have much time to do even this, which is wonderful to think of and also a little daunting. It is joyous and satisfying to fill up a basket of beautiful vegetables to feed your family. It is such a great reward to see the fruits of your labor as physical nourishment. It's also incredibly overwhelming to bring that basket of picked harvest into the house to join the baskets from the previous days. So this is a side note that if you want to do farming, you should have a lot of buckets and baskets on hand. And I'm always precariously balancing another bowl, another dish, another cooking utensil of equipment in our kitchen sink and on our counters because the processing never finishes and clears out. It's always just restarting itself. Like, you wash the can or you put it back on the stove, you fill it with water, you peel all those vegetables, you have your chicken bucket full of scraps. It goes out and comes back in only to be filled with more scraps. And, it just goes and goes and goes. And, at one point I had someone come over to my house and they looked at my kitchen and they're like, don't you ever do the dishes? And kind of that, like, don't want to be judging you, but I'm judging you sort of voice. And I said, actually, I've done the dishes 3 times today. I don't know if they believed me, but I was being honest. And, and every single time I had done the dishes, it was an entire sink full. Another time I had someone come over and they're like, oh, you've decorated for fall, because in our living room we have we have pumpkins covering every single surface. So that's like the piano, the stove, the kitchen counter, just everywhere. And they were super excited, like, oh, you're celebrating fall. I'm like, no, I just actually needed a place to put everything, because I was sick of it being in my kitchen. There have been a couple days, and more than a couple if I'm honest, where I look at the counter and I feel like pulling my hair out because it's just covered in vegetables. And it's one of my pet peeves to have a cluttered counter, and there's nowhere else to put it. And my husband tells me, if you don't like your kitchen this way, we could downsize our garden next year. And I look at him, and we both know that that's not going to happen. What a blessing it is to have such abundance, that despite my failings and shortcomings as a farmer, a gardener, a wife, and mother, that this, what I often consider to be an overwhelming mess, is my reminder that these are the fruits of my continued struggle in this life that we've been given. The burden of abundance is a reminder of that journey. There's joy at the success and the riches of harvest, and there's gratitude for the life that I am able to provide for those that mean the most for me, and love for these hands, this land, and this life. So maybe it's a little bit of a burnout. Maybe it's a little bit of a burden, but it's a gift, and it's gratefully received. And now that the weather is finally cooling down just a little bit, I'll have a little bit of more energy to go out and continue on and see what the next year brings us. And even if the next season in this life that we live continues to be a burden, at least it'll be an abundant one. Thank you for joining us today on our podcast. I'm so appreciative that you took the time to visit us. If you'd like to know more about our farm, please feel free to visit us on our website at silvergoosefamilyfarm.com, or email us with any questions, comments. We love to hear from you at silvergoosefamily@gmail.com. Thank you again, and we'll be back real soon. Bye.